Hey guys, TLS here with another Warlords of Draenor beta video. In this video I will be looking at the Unholy Death Knight. I'm looking into their major changes, their new changed and removed abilities, their new glyphs, their new Draenor perks, and then finally their new changed and removed talents. Now, the biggest change to Unholy Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor is Necrosis. What is Necrosis? Well, Necrosis is a new ability that causes the Death Knight to gain 5% more of the multi-strike stat from all sources. It also causes the multi-strikes from Scourge Strike, Festering Strike, Plague Strike, Soul Reaper, and Blood Boil to deal additional damage as Shadow. If you're confused as to what multi-strike is a new stat that has been introduced in Warlords of Draenor that really mimics the old Marksmanship Hunter Mastery, or more commonly, the old Elemental Shaman Mastery. Essentially, Necrosis makes multi-strike the main or primary secondary stat for Unholy Death Knights. Now, every spec in the game received an ability that kind of dictates what their main secondary stat will be. However, Necrosis has that second portion that adds shadow damage to the multi-strikes of several abilities, and it just kind of emphasizes the importance of multi-strike to Unholy. Now, why did Blizzard do this? Well, multi-strike is a new stat, and I think they just kind of wanted to change the Unholy playstyle just a little bit. So, Unholy Death Knights will be pursuing multi-strike as their main secondary stat. The second major change to Unholy Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor is that diseases will no longer dictate the damage of Scourge Strike. Before, Scourge Strike always had damage modifiers built into its damage equation that would increase its damage based on how many diseases were applied to the target. Those damage modifiers have been removed, and now Scourge Strike will now deal baseline damage no matter what. I honestly think it's a great change to no longer have Scourge Strike and diseases linked together. The last major change to Unholy Death Knights, or really Death Knights in general, is that the 60 and 75 tiers in the talent tree have switched places. Blizzard wanted to give leveling Death Knights access to the rune regenerating abilities a little bit quicker. They didn't want them to wait till level 75, so that is the entire reason behind the change of, swapping those two talent tiers. There is one new ability for Unholy Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor, and that is Dark Succor. Basically, that is an old glyph that has been made a passive. That is the glyph was, the increase to your Death Strike healing based on whether or not you just killed an opponent that granted experience or honor. That has now been, just converted straight into a passive ability for Unholy Death Knights, or Death Knights as a whole. There are several changed abilities for an Unholy Death Knight. The first of these is Army of the Dead. Army of the Dead no longer will require you to stand still while casting, or even cast it. The ghouls will still take the same amount of time to, rise up from the ground, but you can move while casting, and probably most important, you no longer have to worry about being interrupted. So I can run around and cast my ghouls, and they will just pop out of the ground. No problem. Definitely a great change, great quality of life change there for Army of the Dead. The next changed ability for Unholy Death Knights is Even Plaguebringer. It will no longer apply the physical vulnerability effect. Basically, any type of physical vulnerability effect has been removed from the game. That application just has been removed. Frost Death Knights lost brittle bones, so basically just removed from the game. Sudden Doom will no longer reduce the cost of your Death Coil, so when that procs, you will no longer get that, runic power cost reduction. Raise Dead had all of the effects of Master of Ghouls pretty much baked directly into it, so it now has a 1-minute cooldown, and it's a permanent pet, etc. Unholy Aura will now grant an additional 3% versatility. Versatility is another new stat in Warlords of Draenor that basically just buffs everything all around. So in addition to the haste buff that Unholy Aura provides, you also get the 3% versatility buff. It's just nothing more than a buff to your raid utility. Anti-Magic Shell is no longer bound by the 50% health cap. Before, Anti-Magic Shell would only absorb up to 50% of your health. Now, Anti-Magic Shell will absorb 75% of all incoming damage for the entire 5 seconds. It does not matter, what your health pool is, it will just continue to absorb. Icebound Fortitude will now only last 8 seconds as opposed to 12 seconds. Death Strike, the heal on Death Strike no longer is dictated by the previous damage taken. It now is just flat healing, straight healing across the board. It's not, any type of complicated formula. It's just straight healing. Horn of Winter will no longer have a cooldown. It will no longer generate runic power, and it lasts for 1 hour. So Horn of Winter has basically been just changed into a raid buff. That's all it is now. Death Coil will now cost 30 runic power as opposed to 40, so a great change there for Unholy. And then lastly, Blood Boil had all of Pestilence merged into it. And because Pestilence was merged into it, Rolling Blood really didn't make that much sense anymore, so Rolling Blood in the talent tree has been removed, and that's been pretty much baked into Blood Boil as well. So Blood Boil has Pestilence and Rolling Blood all rolled into one. The removed abilities for an Unholy Death Knight, the first is going to be Pestilence, as I just mentioned. It was removed and merged directly into Blood Boil, just kind of an ability consolidation for Unholy Death Knights, or Death Knights in general, really, that happened across the board. Blood Strike was removed. Honestly, I don't know the last time I saw someone use Blood Strike. It's really just kind of died off as an ability. Necrotic Strike was removed. I know a lot of Death Knights are really upset about this, but compared to other classes, it's really not too much of a nerf. Necrotic Strike, the first portion is that absorbs healing from that's incoming, and basically any type of ability in the game like that has been removed. So I wouldn't really worry about that. The second portion about slowing the casting speed of your target, same thing. An Arcane Mage's slow no longer can slow the casting speed of an enemy. Mind-numbing poison has been removed from the game. So any type of casting speed slow has been removed from the game, and that's really to compensate for the fact that healers and caster DPS are really immobile in Warlords of Draenor. So it's kind of a compensate there, and they kind of had to remove something like the slow on casting speed from the game, or else they would just be too powerful. So compared to other classes, basically, Necrotic Strike isn't much of a nerf because everyone lost that stuff. Rune of Sword Breaking, Sword Shattering, Cinder Glacier, and Nerubian Carapace have all been removed. Basically just kind of a reduction of runes across the board and kind of focus more on, a couple of runes instead of having so many. Dark Command is now blood only. That was a taunt, so it's really not much of a loss. Master of Ghouls, as I mentioned, was pretty much baked all directly into Raised Dead. And then lastly, Unholy Frenzy has been removed. I have not found a reason for this. It just was removed from the game. Unholy Death Knights actually got quite a few glyphs in Warlords of Draenor. The first of these is Glyph of Absorb Magic. It increases the total damage absorbed by Anti-Magic Shell by 100%, but Anti-Magic Shell no longer generates runic power. It's exclusive with Glyph of Anti-Magic Shell and Glyph of Regenerative Magic, so you can only have one or the other active at a time. You cannot have all three, you cannot even have two, only one. The next glyph is going to be Glyph of Empowerment. Your Empower Room weapon heals you for 30% of your maximum health. This is something that I can see PvPers taking. Empower Room weapon is a 5-minute cooldown, but that heal is pretty nice, so definitely something worth looking at. There's Glyph of the Ice Reaper. The runes you spend on Chains of Ice will become death runes when they activate. Death runes count as any type of rune. It is exclusive with Glyph of Chains of Ice and Glyph of Icy Runes. Obviously, I don't think any PvEers will be taking this because they don't really use Chains of Ice, but it's something that PvPers can take a look at. I definitely use Chains of Ice a whole lot more as Unholy than I do as Frost, so they now have 3 glyphs really just dedicated straight to Chains of Ice. Speaking of those glyphs, the next one is Glyph of Icy Runes. You gain an additional 10 runic power when you use Chains of Ice, exclusive with Glyph of Chains of Ice and Glyph of the Ice Reaper. So you will choose between those 3 if you really want to have a modifier for your Chains of Ice ability. There's Glyph of Outbreak. Your Outbreak spell no longer has a cooldown, but now costs 30 runic power. I honestly don't see this glyph being taken because of some of the talents in the talent tree, some of the new talents. It's a possibility, it's an option, but I just don't see it being very popular. There's Glyph of Raise Ally. Your Raise Ally ability no longer costs any runic power. This is great for if you're in a raid and the raid leader wants you to, raise some fool who died to some stupid raid mechanic. You can raise him and you won't have to worry about losing any runic power. So something you can take in PvE if you, have the room for the glyph. The last glyph here is Glyph of Runic Power. Whenever you are struck by movement impairing effect, you will generate 3 runic power every 1 second for 5 seconds. So excellent PvP glyph there, something you should consider, especially since movement impairing effects are very powerful in Warlords of Draenor, and you will find yourself snared a lot in the game. That leaves us with the Draenor perks of an Unholy Death Knight. Their Draenor perks are kind of just okay. They're not the best. There's Empowered Gargoyle, which increases the duration of Summoned Gargoyle by 10 seconds. I'm kind of okay with this. I don't really like long cooldowns, so I'm not a big fan of this specifically just because I don't like long cooldown abilities, but it definitely is an improvement to Gargoyle. There's Enhanced Dark Transformation. Dark Transformation no longer costs any runes. I love this one. No longer have to worry about having that rune. I hated situations in which, I finally got that last, stack to get my Dark Transformation, and then I couldn't do it because I didn't have the rune, so I definitely like this change here. There's Enhanced Fallen Crusader. Rune of the Fallen Crusader heals for an additional 3%. More of a PvP Draenor perk than anything else, but little extra healing there. And then lastly, there's Improved Soul Reaper. Your Soul Reaper ability deals additional shadow damage to targets below 45% instead of below 35%. So that one's a little interesting, almost all the way up to 50% for Soul Reaper now. Something you can look at, and I think it's, somewhat cool. But otherwise, the Unholy Draenor perks are just kind of middle of the road compared to the rest of the specs in the game. They're not the best, and they're definitely not the worst. So, kind of some interesting ones there. That leaves us with the talents for an Unholy Death Knight. Going from the top to the bottom, first, I've already mentioned that Rolling Blood has basically been removed from the game because of the merger of Blood Boil and Pestilence, so Plague Bearer has been introduced. Plague Bearer will cause your Death Coil and Frost Strike to also infect your target, adding 4 seconds to the duration of Frost Fever and Blood Plague, and adding an additional stack to Necrotic Plague. I don't know how popular this will be. I mean, Unholy already has Festering Strike. I don't see its popularity as much. From what I know, Plague Leech is still the talent to be taken in PvE, but Plague Bearer is an option for, all Death Knights out there. Lichborn has been changed. You no longer will be healing yourself with Death Coil. That used to be the way to heal. You would transform into an undead with Lichborn and then heal yourself with Death Coil. It has been changed. Now you draw upon Unholy Energy to increase your Leech by 10%. Leech is... it's not a secondary stat, it's a tertiary stat that may appear on items in Warlords of Draenor. So it's kind of a new thing introduced into the game, and basically, you know, it's Leech. You deal damage and you get healing back. Honestly, I don't like this way of healing, so Lichborn really kind of lost some luster with the change here. The level 60 tier, all three talents have been changed in how they function in terms of their activation possibilities. For example, Runic Corruption used to be 45% flat chance, you know, for it to have a chance to activate. Now it's whenever you spend Runic Power, you have a 1.5% chance per Runic Power to gain the rune regeneration, to increase your rune regeneration rate by 100%. Since Death Coil is 30 Runic Power, this does not change anything. The entire tier does not change anything for Unholy Death Knights. I'm just letting you know that those damage formulas have changed. It changes for Frost, but it will not change for Unholy. Death Pact no longer will sacrifice your minion, so that's really great. You no longer have to sacrifice your minion to get the heal out of Death Pact, and it also absorbs incoming health equal to 25% of the max health, so got a little bit of a buff there. Definitely a great change to Death Pact. On level 90, Desecrated Ground, a little addition here. While standing in the Corruption, the Death Knight will now also be immune to roots and snares, in addition to effects that cause loss of control. As I mentioned earlier, roots and snares are going to be very powerful in Warlords of Draenor, so this, in my opinion, from a PvP perspective, really brings it up to par with Remorseless Winter and Gorfiend's Grasp. That leaves us with the level 100 talents for an Unholy Death Knight. The first of these is Defile. Defiles the ground targeted by the Death Knight. Every 1 second, if there are any enemies standing in Defile, it deals 2200 Shadow Frost damage to them and grows in radius and damage by 2.5%. Enemies standing in your Defile deal 10% less damage to you, and it replaces Death and Decay. This is pretty cool. I love how it expands in size, especially if you have, you know, several targets in the area. I'll go ahead and use it here so you can take a look at it. I believe this ability was ripped off of the Lich King fight, so Unholy Death Knights, or Death Knights, now have access to Defile. And you saw it there, it's pretty cool. It expands in size, you know, as the damage goes on, and it's pretty interesting. Right now, this is actually the talent that Unholy and Frost DKs, all DPS DKs, are taking in PvE. So, just a little knowledge there. But the next talent here is going to be Necrotic Plague. Necrotic Plague is a powerful disease that deals 291 Shadow Frost damage per stack every 2 seconds for 30 seconds. Each time it deals damage, it gains 1 stack, and infects another nearby enemy within 8 yards if possible. You gain 2 runic power whenever a target infected with Necrotic Plague attempts to attack you. It replaces Blood Plague and Frost Fever, and is applied by any ability which applied either. This effect cannot be refreshed, and it gains 1 stack instead. That is a mouthful. It is a really cool ability. It combines your diseases into one for one. That's really cool. To have your diseases combined into one, you don't have to worry about applying both of them. But just watch how it spreads. It's really like a disease now. So I'm going to go ahead and use Blood Plague here. And I'll back up, and you'll see it transfer to the bottom right, and then those two will transfer, and then they'll hit the last one. So it really, you know, spreads. It goes from 1 to 2 to 4, 8, 16, and it, you know, it just exponentially starts to spread the disease throughout its timeline. And as you can see, I'm up to 10 stacks now of Necrotic Plague on the target, because each time it adds another stack. It's a really cool ability. I honestly see it being used more in like large-scale PvP encounters or RBGs where it can really spread out there. But in like smaller PvP settings, I just don't see it being used as much. The last talent here is going to be Breath of Sindragosa. Breath of Sindragosa continuously deals... Let me start building up runic power here. Breath of Sindragosa continuously deals 6,300 Shadow Frost damage every 1 second to enemies in a cone in front of you within 12 yards and affects them with Mark of Sindragosa for 6 seconds. You will continue breathing until cancelled or runic power is exhausted. Mark of Sindragosa causes you to be healed for 10% of spell damage dealt by afflicted enemies. So this is pretty cool. It's very powerful. That's why it has a 2-minute cooldown. It does a lot of damage. So I'll go ahead and show you here. Just an AoE cone in front of you, and you can continue to build up your, your runic power as it's going, and then you can also turn it off whenever you want. But 2-minute cooldown, very powerful ability. I see more PvPers wanting some burst in their rotation to be taking Breath of Sindragosa rather than the other two, especially something... Defile isn't so great because it's, it's a static area, you can't move it anywhere. So definitely Breath of Sindragosa is something that's really desirable for some burst damage. Otherwise, that's everything regarding Unholy Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor. They're really in a great place. I kind of feel, as an Unholy Death Knight, I kind of feel like the way Unholy was back sort of in Wrath of the Lich King or maybe beginning of Cataclysm, but they're definitely in a better place. So that's everything dealing with Unholy in Warlords of Draenor. I will see you guys in the next video. Tearless out.